Welcome to IDEV's 2019 webinar series. And this also happens to be part of the CLARE Initiatives Global Evaluation Week. My name is Kobna Hansen, and I'll be guiding today's session. We're really pleased to have everybody with us, all of you, and we're looking forward to a very engaged session, exchange of viewpoints, as well as to learn from everybody who's joined us. Before I get to introducing our speaker for today, let me quickly run through a few housekeeping. First and foremost, what I'll kindly ask everyone is, if you've not already done so, if you'd be kind enough to mute your mics. Thank you. The presenter today will speak for about 40 minutes, following which we'll open it up so we can have an interactive session for Q&A. However, if during the presentation you have any key burning questions, I recommend that you sort of like post the questions via the chat link, and we'll catalog these questions, comments, and then Madhu can respond to them in the order we receive them. If any of you has an urgent burning question, given that this system does not allow us to see who's raised their hand, again, I'll kindly request that you do post a little note, and then this will be noted down, and subsequently we'll call you to make that intervention at the right time. And for those of you who are wondering if the presentation is going to be made available, yes, definitely it's going to be made available, and this will be on the IDEV website. As you can see at the bottom of the PowerPoint, the website address is there. Okay, so without taking much time, I am pleased to introduce today's presenter. Madhu is the Chief Evaluating Officer with the Independent Development Evaluation at the African Development Bank. Prior to joining AfDB, he had worked with the Viscat Nehru Foundation for Development and the Center for Development Studies and Activities as the Deputy Director. Madhu has a PhD in Development Policy and Planning and lots of evaluative experience. He'll be speaking on today's topic, which is most significant change and approach in evaluation. And he'll utilize the webinar to examine how MSC is used in evaluation, drawing on AfDB's evaluation of AfDB's decentralization strategy as an illustrative case. Again, for those of you who are joining us, welcome. And at this point, I will pass the mic to Madhu, who will then get us going.
Thank you, Kobna. Good morning, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. In this presentation, I would like to briefly talk about the most significant change in MSC approach and illustrate its application with an example from the African Development Bank. I should mention that I'm not a regular practitioner of the MSC, but I was part of an evaluation team that carried out MSC in the bank some years ago. As you know, the most significant change approach is an evaluation technique and practice, and there have been numerous reports on the application and utility of the technique, and our own experience having applied it has been very encouraging. Today's presentation I would like to organize in the following manner. Briefly talk about the purpose of the interactive webinar, the most significant change approach, and the key steps in MSC in monitoring and evaluation. If Kobna agrees, we could have a short break at that point, receive some questions and interaction, and then continue with the bank's, our experience of applying MSC in the bank, and then provide some concluding remarks. This webinar is intended to share information on the application of MSC approach in evaluation with an example from the AfDB bank, as I mentioned. More importantly, gather feedback on the participants' experience in the application of this approach, and provide some concluding remarks on the utility of the approach. Now, what is MSC approach? MSC approach is a systematic, transparent, and participatory method of collecting and analyzing qualitative information about change. This information is in the form of stories of change, obtained through individual interviews, which are then subject to selection by different stakeholder groups. I must add here that this technique was developed by Dr. Rick Davies in the 1990s. Since then, the approach has acquired wide acceptance and adaptations in the evaluation practice. Dr. Davies and team carried out the MSC exercise in the bank in 2009 as part of the IDEV evaluation of the bank's decentralization strategy and process, which was carried out by IOD Park, the consulting company in UK. I base my presentation today on our evaluation reports, as well as the guide to the use of MSC by Rick Davies and Hess Dart. While discussing the MSC, understanding the process of MSC, roughly there are 10 steps. All the steps are not equally important or followed, depending on the type of evaluation or monitoring we are doing. In any case, it is important to look at these various steps. First is to start and raise interest. Define the domains of change, defining the reporting period, collect the significant change stories, select the most significant of the stories, feeding back the results of the selection process, verification of the stories, quantification, secondary analysis, and revising the system. I will only very briefly discuss these things because all these materials are available online. Now, how to start and raise interest? It's very important that we explain the methodology to be followed to selected individuals or groups. Start on a very small scale as a pilot, and then see what works and what doesn't. It is important to have champions, very important, and they play a very major role in the MSC process. They need to motivate people, explain the technique to the people, facilitate collection of stories, ensure feedback, maintain confidentiality where necessary. Secondly, defining the domains of change. Domains of change are basically broad categories of significant change stories. As we have done in our bank, those domains were like the portfolio quality, head office, field office relationships, and the country dialogue. Please note that these are not indicators. It allows different interpretations of what constitutes change in an area. Ideally, we can have 3 to 5 domains, not more. We can either have predetermined domains or open window domains. Importantly, we can also have negative change domains. Define the reporting period. As I said, MSC is used for both monitoring as well as evaluation. If it is monitoring, the frequency of conducting MSC has to be defined depending on the reporting requirements. For evaluation, usually it is a one-off exercise. Collect the stories. Begin by asking the question, an open question. During the specific period, what do you think was the most significant change in the specific domain of change? Conduct the interview, take notes, Ideally, the beneficiaries should write the story, use videos, and each story should have specifics about who collected it, a proper description about the story, and why we think it is significant. After collecting the stories, the next step is selecting the stories. It is done through an iterative process of selecting and then pooling stories. We can use the existing hierarchy of the organization, different levels of the organization. Usually, the stories come from the bottom, where the impact actually happens. We can decide the number of levels, how many processes, how many stories, and who should participate in the process. More importantly, the selection process should be an open debate. Read in the group, discuss, select the most significant, and show the reason. Where necessary, one could have a majority vote to decide the level of significance. And the participants can be the beneficiaries, the field staff, line management, people with advisory capacities in the organization. These people can be involved in the selection of the stories. Important to document the entire selection process of determining the most significant change stories. But other stories, which are not necessarily the most significant, can also be very useful in the process of evaluation. This is an illustrative diagram about the flow of stories. Stories are collected from the bottom. It is forwarded to the higher levels, discussed and the level of significance decided, the selection process, and to the highest level. Whatever decisions taken, whatever discussions happened at different levels should be informed to the level from where the story has come. So everyone is aware of what is happening. It is important to give feedback about the selection process. Feedback given to the providers of the story. And it completes the feedback loop and creates an ongoing dialogue on what is significant change. We can use different media to provide the feedback. As we have done in the bank, we used a blog in order to present to the stakeholders all the stories we collected in the MSC exercise. It is important to verify the change story. Sometimes it can be fictitious, it can be exaggerations or induced by misunderstandings. But verification is an expensive affair, so verify only the stories which are selected as the most significant. It is important to have quantification, even though the focus here is qualitative reporting. But you can have some quantification in this exercise, for example, within individual stories, number of people, activities, etc. Also important is the secondary analysis and meta monitoring. It is useful to have examination, classification, and analysis of all of the content of all stories. But though it is done not very frequently. Keep a record of all stories, and from the evaluation. For evaluation, the secondary analysis can contribute to the summative evaluation, for example, and it can contribute to the analysis of outcomes. Revising the system, the organizations that have applied more significant change, they have made changes in the process of application of more significant change and how it is implemented. Some people have even evaluated the MSC approach. More significant change is very useful in certain contexts compared to others. When we have to evaluate complex programs that produce diverse and emergent outcomes. When we have large programs with several organizational layers, and when the program is focused on social change. It is participatory in ethos and design, and it is more useful when the evaluation is focused on learning rather than accountability. I would just like to mention the key enablers for carrying out the MSc exercise. It is easier and it is more useful in organizational cultures that accept failures. Unfortunately, it is not very common, but we see organizations like that, organizations that learn. So the focus here is learning. And there is a need for having champions with good facilitation skills. And we have to have enough time to run several cycles of this approach. It is time intensive. And of course, we have to have commitment by the senior management. From an organizational learning point of view, MSc has certain advantages. It can influence the values of stakeholders, including staff within the organization, facilitate dialogue and learning. And more importantly, it can facilitate a shared vision among the stakeholders about the subject we are evaluating. At this stage, I would suggest that we take a brief break and to take some questions or receive some inputs on the ideas discussed so far. Thank you. Yes, Sophie has asked the question, is it possible in this methodology to include focus group discussions and to the extent possible, PRA? PRA is not applied, at least in the evaluation that we have carried out in the bank. Focus group discussion was possible, but other techniques and methods in PRA was not applied. And I haven't seen documentation to say that PRA was applied in this MSc approach. I don't know what is your experience. If you have any other experience, please share with us. Okay.
Sophie's typing, so let's see what she says.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie, for that intervention. I think I would continue with the rest of my presentation. Now, I would like to move on to the experience we have about the application of MSc in the African Development Bank. In 2009, as I mentioned, we carried out an evaluation of the bank's decentralization policy, decentralization strategy and process. And it was a formative evaluation of the decentralization strategy and process. The decentralization process was ongoing, but there were understanding and there were realizations that there is a need for augmenting the process of decentralization. So then the evaluation was called for, and we carried out the evaluation. In the evaluation, we used mixed methods, combining both quantitative as well as qualitative methods. And the MSc was introduced. The focus of the MSc was to look at changes in the management of the portfolio, country dialogue, and head office, field office relations, which were actually the expected benefits or expected outcomes of the decentralization process. There was a rationale why we used the significant change stories. We wanted to identify significant, unexpected, difficult to quantify changes to provide more in-depth description of the events monitored, identify areas of agreement and disagreement about the expected outcomes and process, which is very normal in the case of decentralization, to promote dialogue between field offices, now they are called country offices, and the headquarters about the decentralization process. And through these processes, we wanted to identify if there are innovations happening, what are the risks to performance, and identify strategic choices to approach decentralization in the bank. 4 countries were selected based on the seniority of the country offices: Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Tanzania. The MSC processes were applied. Altogether, we interviewed 21 people, 21 bank staff in the 4 country offices. Totally a mix, and it was we were having a mix of staff, not at just the higher level, but at different levels. Altogether, about 36% of the staff were interviewed. And in the process of selection in country, it involved the field office team, selection meetings with available staff, individual interviews, and selection in the team. And there was also a video summary of the most significant change story. We also were able to involve the government stakeholders as well as the development partners. In the headquarters, the stakeholder selection and discussion happened like this, along different vice presidencies. We have the regional departments, the sector departments, finance and corporate service departments, and the decentralization working group, which was facilitating the process of decentralization in the bank. All the stories collected were uploaded on a blog, which is called Decentralizing AfDB blog, in order to ensure feedback, transparency, and participation. This is a picture about that blog, which is actually managed by Dr. Rick Davies. What we found, as I said, we were looking at 3 domains of change. Altogether, we collected 63 significant change stories through 21 interviews in the 4 countries mentioned above. In the area of country dialogue, we found the bank mobilizes donors to address the government's high priority needs, as reported from Sierra Leone. On the portfolio quality improvement, we found that disbursement speeded up through better document management from Sierra Leone, and the proactive portfolio review reduced the processing time by 1 to 3 months, as reported from Burkina Faso. And about the head office, field office relationships, it was found that better communications between the head office and field office, it meant more responsive field office. And great trust in the field office is increasing efficiency of bank operations. And more importantly, locating a task manager in the field office speeded up implementation. What we found with respect to the questions we asked, did we find anything new in the stories we collected, stories of change we collected? Was there anything new? We had mixed responses. Certain people said that, okay, certain changes are new, but others said that it is more intuitive. Was there difficult to quantify changes? Yes, we were able to learn a lot from this process of MSC. Was there areas of agreement or disagreement? Yes, the headquarters agreement was the strongest on portfolio improvement, and agreement was weakest on the country dialogue. I would like to conclude here. The use of participatory approach in IDEV evaluation was new at that time, and it was well received by all stakeholders. The most significant change approach helped generate greater awareness about the benefits of decentralization, and subsequently led to greater decentralization in the bank. It contributed to the formative evaluation by supplementing evaluation information. We did not only depend on MSC, but there was a major component of quantitative evaluation, assessment, and evaluation. So the MSC effectively supplemented evaluating information in this regard. It was a bit costly at that time. It consumed almost 40% of the evaluation budget. But I think that if it is conducted now, it may not be that expensive because we have greater access to cheaper technology. But at that time, it was considered costly. And some even argued, is it really value for money? Because for those people, many change stories were very intuitive. But for me, as the task manager for the evaluation, it really served the purpose and helped the bank moving forward by learning the lessons from that evaluation and accelerated the process of decentralization in the bank. Thank you very much for listening. We could open up for some comments from you, some discussions. So this is an interactive webinar, so interactive part is more important than sort of lecture. So thank you very much again.
All right, Madhu, thank you again. I think this is wonderful. Thanks for the very insightful presentation on most significant change and how it's been utilized both, in IDEV, but also by others. As you did rightly say, at this point, would allow listeners to unmute their mics, and such that if people want to ask a question or basically to share their own experience, they'll be able to do that at this point. I don't know who will start first with us in terms of questions or comments on most significant change and how they might have used it, or basically if there's a specific question for Madhu. Hemen, it seems you want to ask a question. Kindly go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm so sorry. I only managed to join the discussion, the presentation at the last slide. So I've missed most of the presentation. I hope that you can share it with us. But perhaps I can just ask some advice. And I'm sorry if you.
Hemen.
Hello. Yes. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Hi, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, you can hear me. Oh, yes. So I'm from QAA for yeah. So it's our program is really focused on strengthening parliamentary systems of evidence use, and we are considering, well, in the process of doing a tracer study of the effects of the capacity building initiatives over the last 3 years. And we are exploring the possibility of using the most significant change methodology or aspects of it for this. And I was really just looking for some advice on it. And I suppose it's a very general question, and ways in which aspects of it could be adapted for a study. But I'm really interested in the qualitative insights that could come from this, and yeah, so it's a general question, I suppose.
Hello, Herman.
Yes.
We could not hear the entire question. Could you please repeat your question?
Oh, I'm sorry. So as I said, I missed most of the presentation, but I wanted to let you know that we are considering using the most significant change approach for a tracer study on the capacity building interventions that we've undertaken with parliaments over the past 3 years. And I'm really just looking for general advice on whether this could work in the parliamentary context in terms of looking at the capacity building work we've done with members of parliament and researchers. Yeah, so it's a general question, and I'm sorry, but it's not very specific.
Yeah, I would recommend the use of MSC, but at the same time we have to be mindful of the different caveats that we have. The program that you are, or the program that you are evaluating, and the organizational setup, it should be sort of favorable for the idea of open discussion. That's number one. And secondly, it is a bit costly. I don't know what is the usual cost now, but for us, as I said, it was a bit costly at that time, but we still went ahead because it was providing a very useful input for our evaluation. And the focus is on learning rather than accountability. So as far as I gather, your organizational setup and the program is quite amenable for the MSC approach, because in the end, it is a bit revolutionary. It is not a conventional evaluation practice. It is more transparent, so all stakeholders are aware of every aspect in the evaluation process. Everyone is involved. So the iteration involved in the decision of significant change stories, everyone is informed. So if these conditions are prevalent, then I would suggest that you can go ahead. You could use MSC, and I think globally the approach has been widely accepted and used. And there are various versions. It does not need to be the textbook prescriptive format. You can sort of decide what is important for you and in what way you want to frame your evaluation. So I like the approach. I found it useful, and I would like to recommend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope that we can contact you in the future for some advice.
Yeah, most certainly. Most certainly.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Do we? Thanks again for the question. Just checking if we have any more questions for Madhu, and/or any experiences that colleagues would want, and participants would want to share. Since I can't see who's raised their hand, please, if you could just key into the dialog box, such that I can then call upon you to kindly share your experience. Okay. It seems that Madhu was, very articulate in educating us all on the essence of most significant change. It's been very insightful having you online. Thanks to Sophie for intervention, Hermine for intervention. And I think for those of you who are still digesting the essence of most significant change, what I would suggest is that we don't necessarily have to end here, so that we can take this discussion online. Madhu is willing to receive questions, emails, suggestions from you, and ultimately the conversation should not stop here. As I said, from our part, the video of this presentation will be made available, and it will be available on the IDEV website. I would like to use the opportunity basically to thank everybody for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and we do appreciate you taking time off your busy schedules to come in and join us such that we discuss this topic of most significant change. It definitely, from what we've learned, is a very invaluable tool for qualitative methodology, or qualitative methodology tool, which I believe, we can use in our own works every day. So on behalf of Madhu, the team here, and IDEV, I want to sincerely thank you all for joining us, and hope you join us next time. Thank you very much.